Today marks 1 year since I started painting with watercolors, and here are the 7 things I wish someone had told me before I even picked up my brush. And the first thing is, we always work light to dark. Meaning we start light with the lightest color or the most transparent wash and then add color or value as we progress with our layers. Why? Because if you start with a dark color and then try to paint with a lighter color, it just won't show. And if you want your second layer to show, you'll just be adding more and more color and may just end up getting things way too dark. As we can see, once we go with the lighter wash, it doesn't show, okay? It might as well not have been there at all. You can't see anything. The second one is what happens when you actually want to see the lighter color over the dark. You have to use so much color, so much pigment that everything just grows darker, okay? And a little bit more opaque, which kind of isn't what we're after, right? For the third one, this is the perfect one. We start with a lighter wash, the light yellow, and then we add the darker color and we can see both layers perfectly. That's all there is to it. And all of this happens, of course, because watercolors are transparent, which is actually the second thing I just kept forgetting. If what you're looking for is opaque layers, then watercolors is not your medium, I'm afraid. Watercolors is all about water, and water brings transparency. I like the saying that goes, if you're painting with watercolors, you are not painting with paint, you're painting with water. And that's so true. That's what allows us to add those lovely layers, to glaze our paintings and create real depth and complexity on our paintings. We want that subtlety, that process that requires patience. Filling your brush up with loads of paint and not too much water just to speed up the results just completely defeats the purpose of using watercolors, which is something I have to keep telling myself over and over again. Now, the third thing to always keep in mind is watercolor paint lightens when it dries. Some more than others, that's true. For example, Kuretake Gansai Tambi paints, you don't see it as much. Their wet version is much truer to their dry version, but that's not, typical watercolors. Typical watercolors, transparent watercolors, have a drying shift. If you're happy with the colors you're seeing while you're painting, it will end up being way too light by the time it dries, okay? The colors will fade, and that's a bummer. The way you deal with this is either add more paint when you're painting, make your colors more vibrant than you want them to look when dried, or just do some color tests before painting, okay? Take a piece of leftover paper and try out your colors. Wait for them to dry and see how much more paint you need to add to make it perfect once you're finished. I mean, just look at this. What can I tell you? The difference is quite noticeable. I hope you can see it in video also. The wet paint is much more vibrant, much more pigmented, and the dried paint is a little bit lighter. The value just lightens up. Yeah, so keep that in mind at all times. Moving on, the fourth thing you absolutely need to know to paint with watercolor is paint always follows water. If you want your watercolor paint to remain in one specific area, you cannot get the whole paper wet because it will spread, which is kind of what we take advantage of when using wet on wet, right? We first water the area of the paper we want and then we let the paint loose to do its thing. But it can definitely be a problem if you wet areas you don't want to paint, in which case make it dry before adding paint or it is game over. As you can see, paint just covered all the area that I wetted, and because I purposefully went with my brush over the line, that's where the paint followed, to the point that when I lean the paper over, it will stop where the water stops, and because this one went outside the circle, it just went over. Fifth thing to know, the value of our paint changes with water, not white paint, which is why I keep telling you guys that white paint is the most useless color to have on a watercolor set. I don't get it. Why? There's no use for it. Well, there's use for it if you want to make opaque colors, but watercolor is about transparency, so no white, just water. I mean, yes, it's good for making pastels and whatnot, but not to lighten your color value. In watercolors, unlike other mediums, all you need is water to go from dark to light. The more water you add, the lighter your value will be, and that is enough. Now, these last two things I wish someone had told me before I even started painting have more to do with supplies than actual technique. And I guess the sixth one is 1 pot of water is not enough. Not at all. You need at least 2 if you don't want muddy colors. Some people use 1 pot for cleaning the brush and another to load the brush with fresh water. Personally, I do it a little bit differently because if I use 1 pot to clean my brush of all the colors, soon enough that water will be so muddy it will end up contaminating my clean water too. So the way I find works the best is having 1 pot for reds, pinks, oranges and yellows and another for blues, greens, purples, grays, etc. So I don't have a specific pot only for brush cleaning, but I find that this way the paints never get muddy. Unless I mix them up, which kind of happens all the time. With the browns, it kind of depends. If it's like a burnt sienna, so it's very orangey, I use my red pot. But if it's like a darker brown that you can see has more blues or grays in it, then it's definitely the blue pot. And I may have just saved the most important one for last because you cannot paint with watercolors if you don't know this, which is your watercolor paper, regardless of being 100% cotton or cellulose, needs to be flat at all times. Wonky paper with lots of ups and downs and valleys and hills and whatnot interferes with your painting. Water tends to move depending on the surface of the paper. So if the paper sinks, all your water is going to concentrate there, and if you're trying to paint a part that's higher up, it's just gonna slide right off. So yeah, a flat paper is a must, and I usually do this in one of 2 ways. I either tape my paper onto something flat, and the table will do, although you can't really spin the painting around, which can sometimes be very bothersome. So I try to tape it onto a cardboard, like the back of a watercolor paper block that's empty or something like that. And you can use some washi tape or painter's tape, that's much cheaper. Another way is using a glued watercolor block. This means all the pages are glued together on all ends and leaving just a small gap to be able to release the paper. This way it will not buckle no matter how much water you add. These glued blocks are a little bit more expensive, but they're really, really practical. Now tell me guys, what is the one thing you would like to know before you even started painting with watercolors? Leave me a comment below letting me know, okay? And I will see you soon. Bye bye!